The iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max are incredible content creation tools, and if your budget is between $1,000 to $1,500 for a camera, you'd be hard-pressed to find an all-in-one video solution that performs better than the iPhone. But if you want to maximize the potential of the cameras on this phone, you're going to want to adjust some key settings. So in this video, let's get your iPhone set up for recording talking head style YouTube videos, cinematic B-roll, and slow motion footage.
You got to just press record.
So starting off, you'll obviously notice that your phone has 4 different camera and lens options. So you have the standard wide angle camera. That's the main camera that the iPhones have. You have the ultra wide, which is a wide kind of 15mm focal length equivalent. You have the telephoto, which is the long reaching. It's like a 5x zoom style camera. And then you have the front facing selfie camera on the front screen of the iPhone. Now, as a basic rule of thumb, you're always going to want to use the standard wide camera or the ultra wide camera when you can. These two cameras are by far going to give you the best possible video and even photo results. And they actually just upgraded the ultra wide camera in the 16 Pros as well and give us a 48 megapixel camera. So this gives you way better image quality out of the wide angle camera than iPhones have typically had in the past. The 5x telephoto lens is just fine. I wouldn't really use it honestly for video purposes too often. And then the front facing selfie camera is okay in a pinch, especially if you're just doing social media vertical content. It's usually okay, but honestly the image quality really suffers compared to the rear facing main camera and even the ultra wide camera on the back of the phone. A little pro tip here though, if you're wondering how you'll be able to see yourself if you decide to use the rear camera and the screen is facing away from you, obviously it's a little bit hard to see the screen. So a couple workarounds that you can use are, if you do have an Apple Watch, the Apple Watch has a camera control app native to the Apple Watch where you can pull up a feed of your camera and even hit record right there. So you wouldn't have to stand up and hit record on the phone. You could just record on your Apple Watch, but also monitor your video signal, which is really helpful. But I know that's like a couple $100 solution. So a really cheap solution is this really cool mirror right here from Nicey Rig. It's their selfie mirror, and we'll link this down in the description below. I use this all the time when I'm recording on my iPhone because I'm able to attach this to a phone mount that has any sort of cold shoe adapter and screw that into the cold shoe. And now I'm able to tilt the mirror into a position where I can see my phone screen through the mirror and still be able to use the rear facing cameras. And this thing only costs like $40. So it's a great investment to be able to use your iPhone's rear facing cameras, but still be able to view your phone screen to make sure that your composition is correct. So now that we know which cameras are the best on the iPhone, let's talk about resolution. So if you open up your camera app and make sure that you are in video mode, you can actually select your resolution by clicking the resolution icon on the top right of your phone screen. So normally it says 4K or maybe HD, depending on if you're in 1080p resolution or 4K. So really you can just toggle that dial right there to decide which resolution you want. And in our opinion, you should always be shooting in 4K resolution. This is going to give you the best possible results for a video. Really, I'd only use 1080p for the highest slow motion frame rates, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But for the most part, you're going to want to shoot in 4K resolution. If you also want to make sure this setting is correct, you can actually dive into your settings menu and then dive into your camera settings. So select camera and then record video, and then you can select your resolution right there just to make sure that your resolution is actually set to 4K. Now, when it comes to choosing the right frame rate for recording your video, it really depends on what you're shooting. So there's really 3 main situations you'll specifically want to think about, which are talking head style YouTube videos like I'm filming right now. There's also generic B-roll capture, which could be a variety of things. And then specifically, if you're looking for slow motion footage, there'd be some different types of things you want to adjust there. So let's start with talking head style YouTube videos. For this format, you're always going to want to shoot in either 24 or 30 frames per second. And of course, you want to be in the 4K resolutions. These are the most typical frame rates that you'll want to work with basically all the time. And if you're in a country that shoots in the PAL format, and if that's you probably know who you are, you'll be selecting 25 frames per second instead. Now, when it comes to recording B-roll footage or supplemental footage to sort of reinforce whatever it is you're talking about, you have a lot of flexibility here. You can really record in any frame rate that you choose. It just depends on what you want to do with the footage after the fact. So again, you'll always want to make sure you're in 4K resolution, but then you can select 24, 30, 60, or if you do have the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max like we're talking about, this does allow 120 frames per second shooting in just standard video mode. So if you are in video mode, just look at the top right of the screen and just toggle the logo on the top right corner to select your different frame rates. So you can cycle through all these frame rates and choose whatever frame rate works best for you. And if for some reason you don't see some of the frame rate options, you can dive into your camera settings and then make the adjustments from there. The iPhone now has a really cool feature as well that allows you to slow down your footage after you've shot it, but still do this in the camera app, which is really cool. So you can open up the clip and then select this little stopwatch icon in the top right corner. And now you can select the frame rate that you would like to slow the footage down to. This is a really cool feature that saves you time in post-production, so you don't have to bring your footage into editing software to slow it down after the fact. Another mode you could try with either your A-roll or your B-roll is cinematic mode. I actually really like this mode, and I often use it when I'm out shooting content for YouTube, and I just want to get B-roll of whatever product I'm using, and I want the emphasis to be on that product, and then the background to be a little bit blurrier. So what this mode does is adds software-based blur to replicate what happens when you shoot at lower aperture values on more expensive camera lenses. So all that really means is the background is going to look more blurry, but the cool thing is you can adjust your aperture as high or as wide open as f2, and then stop all the way down to f16 to keep more of your frame in focus. And really this is up to your personal preference, but the coolest thing is you can actually change your blur level after the fact with the Photos app. So this is kind of crazy. You can change your sort of fake depth of field after you've already shot your footage. This feature definitely doesn't work perfect all of the time, and sometimes it'll blur like the edges of your hair or your shoulder because it is software based, so it's not going to be perfect all of the time. But for the most part, it works pretty well. So if I was you, I would just give it a try because you actually might end up really loving this shooting mode. And then the third type of content you might be shooting is specifically slow motion footage, and there is a dedicated slow motion mode in the iPhone 16 Pros and a lot of the different iPhone series cameras. But the unique thing about the 16 Pro series is we now get 4K and up to 120 frames per second slow-mo shooting, or even 1080p at 240 FPS. So on previous models, these weren't even an option, especially at 240 frames per second. You were actually limited to 720p, which really isn't that usable at all. Now we have way better slow motion options with the 16 Pro series. And then alternatively, if you don't want to shoot in slow motion mode, but might want to convert your footage to slow motion later, you can just shoot in the regular video mode and toggle your frame rate to the desired value. So you just want to make sure you're shooting in at least 60 frames per second, if not 120, so that you can slow your footage down later. Now, there are a few other important camera settings we want to adjust. First, you want to dive into your settings app and click on camera, and then click on record video. Now scroll down to the lock camera feature, and we want to make sure that this is turned on because we don't want our camera to be jittery as we're recording and trying to shift between these different cameras and focal lengths if we're just trying to record a continuous take. So be sure to check lock camera, and this will help a lot with that. You'll also typically want to turn on enhanced stabilization, which is going to help stabilize the footage, especially for vlogging. So I highly recommend you just turn this on and leave it on, unless you know you're going to be doing a lot of studio work with your camera and locking that camera off of a tripod, then you could turn this off. But for the most part, you'll just typically want to keep this setting on. The next setting is auto FPS, and I'd actually recommend you turn this off because we don't want the camera to automatically decide what frame rate we're going to be shooting in. If we just told the camera we want to shoot in 60 frames per second or 30, we don't want the camera to automatically reduce that to 24 just because it determines maybe you're in a low light situation and 24 might look better. But if you were planning on shooting a slow motion clip and then the camera converts it to 24 frames per second, it's going to be pretty frustrating. So just turn this off and then recognize that if you're in a low light situation, the higher frame rates are going to perform a little bit worse than the lower frame rates would in that same low light scenario. And the last one we'll touch on is the lock white balance setting. I often turn this on if I'm recording in a studio environment because my lighting isn't going to change and my white balance shouldn't be changing either. If my white balance does start to shift, it's because it's trying to pick up something going on in the background or my shirt color and then compensating for the white balance because of those different colors it might be picking up. But we do not want that in a studio situation. We just want a consistent white balance look. Now, if you are out in the streets vlogging and moving from interior to exterior scenes, you would want to keep this setting turned off so that your camera can adjust white balance as it moves from scene to scene. But if you're in a more controlled lighting situation, then you definitely want to check lock white balance and turn that setting on. And if you really want to take your iPhone to the next level, there are some advanced settings that you can turn on, including ProRes log. This unlocks the camera to be more in line with what more professional cameras can do by shooting at the highest best possible quality. So ProRes is a really high quality codec that just gets the best possible image performance out of your iPhone. And it also allows you to shoot in the log image profile, which is sort of a flat image to retain the most color and exposure information of your scene. This might not be appealing to a lot of people, especially at the beginning of their creative journey, but if you ever find yourself a little frustrated with the over-sharpened iPhone look, or you feel like you don't have enough control over your image in post-production, this is a really great option that you can explore when you're ready. If you shoot in ProRes, by default, the native camera app is shooting at the highest quality ProRes codec, but the file sizes, because of this, are absolutely ginormous. So you can actually plug in an external hard drive to replace the internal storage on your iPhone and then record to that external drive. So here at Think Media, we use the Samsung T7 drive pretty often if we're recording with our iPhone. We'll link that down in the description below. And you can just plug this straight into your iPhone and it's going to recognize it as a memory device, and then we'll record content onto that drive instead of your phone, which is going to save you a ton of storage space. And you have the benefit of not having to transfer your files from your phone to your computer. You can just plug in that hard drive that you just recorded to directly into your computer and then edit off of that drive. There also is a really cool free app for video creators called the Blackmagic Camera app that lets you shoot in a more compressed ProRes setting to save even more file space. And it also lets you have full manual control over your iPhone to select your shutter speed and your ISO, also manual focus and your white balance and a lot more settings. This is a really cool app, especially if you are already familiar with cameras. You're going to love this app and it's going to make your iPhone feel more like a DSLR or mirrorless camera would. So we'll link this app down in the description below so you can check it out. I'd also be sure to try to pick up an external microphone because the internal microphones on these iPhones still aren't very great. With the 16 Pro series, they did add 4 different microphones on these phones for a new spatial audio recording experience, which is pretty cool, but I still don't think it's better than having a dedicated microphone. So one of our favorites is the Hollyland Lark M2. So this is a really tiny wireless microphone that sounds amazing for less than $150. So we'll link that down in the description below. A mic like this is really going to improve the audio qualities of your videos substantially. And with that, those are all of the main settings you want to make sure you have dialed in on your new iPhone 16 Pro. If you want to check out some more accessories that pair great with these iPhones to turn them into more of a fully functional studio camera, you can check out this video right here on the screen, and we'll see you in the next video.